My neighbor knocked at 3 a.m. and said, "Pack a bag. Your family isn't who they say they are." So we did. Mrs. Kowalski's knuckles hit our front door exactly 3 times, precise and urgent, the sound cutting through the silence of our sleeping house like gunshots. I was 17 and had been awake anyway, scrolling through college applications on my laptop when I heard it. My first thought was fire. My second was that something had happened to her husband. My third thought, the one that made my stomach drop, was that she knew something we didn't. I ran downstairs in my pajamas and looked through the peephole. Mrs. Kowalski stood on our porch in a winter coat over what looked like a nightgown, no makeup, hair uncombed. In the 4 years we'd lived next door to her, I'd never seen her less than perfectly composed. She looked terrified. I opened the door and she pushed past me without asking, closing it firmly behind her and engaging the deadbolt. "Wake your brother," she said, her voice low and tight. "Pack clothes for 3 days, documents if you have them, cash if your parents keep any in the house. You have 20 minutes, maybe less." The statement was so specific, so impossible to misunderstand, that my brain short-circuited trying to process it. "Mrs. Kowalski, what are you talking about? It's 3 in the morning." She grabbed both my shoulders, her grip strong enough to hurt. "Listen to me very carefully, Alexis. Your parents are not who they claim to be. Their real names are not James and Victoria Cross. You are not safe in this house tonight. In approximately 15 minutes, people are coming for them, and you and your brother cannot be here when that happens." I'd been living in suburban Minneapolis for 4 years, attending Jefferson High School where I was a straight-A student and captain of the debate team. My parents worked from home doing something vague with digital marketing consulting that I'd never questioned, because teenagers generally don't question how bills get paid. We lived in a nice 3-bedroom house with a finished basement and a yard. My younger brother Noah was 14 and obsessed with video games and skateboarding. We were normal. Aggressively, unremarkably normal. Mrs. Kowalski had lived next door with her husband Paul since before we moved in. She was a retired librarian with a gentle demeanor who baked cookies for the neighborhood kids and volunteered at the community center. She was not the kind of person who showed up at 3 a.m. with cryptic warnings about false identities. But the fear in her eyes was real. The urgency in her voice was real. And something about the way she said it made every strange detail from the past 4 years suddenly click into focus like a photograph developing. How my parents never let us apply for passports. How we never went on vacations that required flying. How there were no photos in our house from before we moved here. How my parents had no old friends who visited, no family we ever contacted. How they'd always paid for everything in cash or with prepaid cards. "I don't understand," I said, but I was already moving toward the stairs. "Who are you? How do you know this?" Mrs. Kowalski's expression shifted to something between pity and professional assessment. "My name isn't actually Gloria Kowalski. I'm Special Agent Gloria Reyes with the FBI. I've been maintaining surveillance on this address for 3 years. Your parents are wanted for multiple federal crimes committed under their real names, Raymond and Victoria Geller. Tonight, the Bureau is executing arrest warrants. I wasn't supposed to warn you, but I've watched you and your brother for 3 years, and you're good kids who don't deserve to be traumatized by an armed raid." My hands had started shaking. "Your FBI? You've been spying on us for 3 years?" She pulled out a badge from her coat pocket, the official shield and identification card looking impossibly real under our hallway light. "Special Agent Gloria Reyes, Federal Bureau of Investigation, badge number A7823. "I've been doing my job," she said quietly. "But somewhere in the past 3 years, I started caring about collateral damage. Now wake your brother and pack. We're running out of time." I ran upstairs and burst into Noah's room. He was sprawled across his bed in basketball shorts and a t-shirt, controller still in hand, his gaming setup still running. "Noah, wake up. Now." He groaned and rolled over. "What do you want? It's the middle of the night." "Pack clothes. 3 days worth. Right now. Don't ask questions." Something in my voice made him sit up and actually look at me. "What's going on?" I grabbed his backpack and started shoving clothes into it from his dresser. "Mrs. Kowalski says we need to leave. She says Mom and Dad aren't who they say they are. She says people are coming for them and we can't be here." Noah's face went white. "That's insane. Mrs. Kowalski is crazy. We should wake Mom and Dad." I thought about that. Thought about waking my parents and asking them if they were actually fugitives living under assumed names. Thought about their reactions, their explanations, their reassurances. And I thought about Mrs. Kowalski's FBI badge and the desperate urgency in her voice. "No," I said. "We do what she says. Get dressed, pack, move." While Noah scrambled to comply, I went to my room and grabbed my own backpack, dumped out textbooks and filled it with clothes, my laptop, phone charger. I grabbed the shoebox from my closet where I kept birthday money and babysitting cash. $340. I took my social security card from my desk drawer where I'd put it after applying for my first job. Grabbed the folder with my birth certificate and school records. Everything felt surreal and urgent and wrong. Downstairs, Mrs. Kowalski, Agent Reyes, was standing by the front window peering through the blinds. "We need to go, now." Noah and I looked at each other. "What about Mom and Dad?" I asked. Agent Reyes turned to face us, her expression grim. "Your parents made choices that led to tonight. You didn't. You can come with me right now and be safe, or you can stay and be present when federal agents storm this house with weapons drawn. Those are your options. Noah grabbed my hand. He was 14 and scared and looking at me to make the decision. I thought about my parents sleeping upstairs. Thought about all the lies they must have told us. Thought about what kind of people ran from the FBI for years while raising children in a fabricated life. We go, I said. Agent Reyes opened the front door slowly, checking the street. At 3:08 a.m., the neighborhood was dark and quiet. She led us to her house next door, using a key to open her front door. Inside, it looked exactly like a normal suburban home. Floral couch, family photos on the walls, the smell of vanilla candles. But Agent Reyes led us straight to the basement and opened a door I'd never noticed on my previous visits. Behind it was an office that looked nothing like the rest of the house. Computers, monitors, filing cabinets, radio equipment, professional surveillance setup hidden in plain sight. Stay here, she said. Don't make noise. Don't turn on lights. I need to make a call. She picked up a phone and dialed, spoke in low, urgent tones to someone on the other end. I couldn't make out all the words, but I heard extracted the minors and SWAT team ETA and need immediate protective custody arrangements. Noah and I sat on the floor of that hidden FBI office and stared at each other. My brother looked like he might throw up. Is this real? He whispered. Are Mom and Dad really criminals? I wanted to say no, wanted to insist this was a mistake or a nightmare, but I kept thinking about all those little things that never quite added up. The way my parents flinched when police cars drove past. The way they avoided having their photos taken. The way they'd insisted we be homeschooled for 2 years before finally relenting and letting us attend regular school, and even then only after we'd begged. The way they sometimes seemed to forget details about their own supposed pasts, contradicting themselves about where they grew up or how they met. I don't know, I said honestly, but Agent Reyes thinks so, and she's FBI. Through the basement windows, we heard vehicles arriving, multiple vehicles moving quietly but purposefully. Agent Reyes came back down and checked her watch. 3:22 a.m., right on schedule. She looked at us with something like regret. I'm sorry you have to hear this, but you'll find out soon anyway. Your parents, Raymond and Victoria Geller, are wanted in connection with a Ponzi scheme that defrauded investors of approximately $45 million 8 years ago. They disappeared before they could be arrested. The FBI has been tracking them for years. 3 years ago, we got a solid lead that they were living in this area under new identities. I was assigned deep cover surveillance to confirm identification and gather evidence for prosecution. The numbers were too big to process. $45 million. 8 years. My entire childhood had been a lie built on theft and fraud. Noah made a choking sound and I put my arm around him. What happens now? I asked. Agent Reyes checked one of her monitors, which showed a feed of our front yard. I could see figures in tactical gear approaching our house. SWAT executes the arrest warrant. Your parents are taken into custody. You and Noah are placed in protective custody while the state figures out what to do with minor children of arrested federal fugitives. Probably foster care, at least temporarily, while they search for any relatives willing to take you. Foster care. The words hit like a physical blow. We don't have any relatives, I said. Mom always said both our parents were only children and our grandparents were all dead. Agent Reyes' expression darkened. You might want to reconsider what your mother told you about anything. Raymond Geller has 2 living brothers and a sister in Nevada. Victoria Geller's parents are alive in Florida. Your parents cut off all family contact when they went on the run. The world kept tilting. We had aunts and uncles and grandparents we'd never met. Family who'd been told we didn't exist or had been lied to about where we were. The monitors showed agents breaching our front door, showed lights coming on inside, showed figures moving through rooms with weapons drawn. I couldn't see my parents on the screens, but I knew they were being woken up, arrested, their fake life collapsing around them. Agent Reyes made another call. This is Reyes. I have the Geller minors in protective custody at my location, requesting immediate social services response and legal guidance on placement. She listened for a moment. Understood. We'll wait here. She hung up and turned to us. Social workers are being dispatched. They'll arrive within the hour. You'll be taken to a temporary facility while arrangements are made. Noah started crying, quiet tears that he tried to hide by looking down. I felt numb, like I was watching this happen to someone else. Can we see them? I asked. Our parents? Before they're taken away? Agent Reyes shook her head. That's not advisable. They're being processed as federal fugitives. Any contact with you at this point could be considered witness tampering or could compromise the case. I'm sorry. Through the window, I watched as my parents were led out of our house in handcuffs. My father, Raymond Geller, was in his pajamas, shouting something I couldn't hear. My mother, Victoria Geller, was crying, struggling against the agents holding her arms. They looked smaller somehow, less like the parents I'd known and more like strangers caught in something terrible. I don't understand how you lived next to us for 3 years and we never suspected, I said to Agent Reyes. She sat down in her desk chair, suddenly looking very tired. That was the point. Deep cover surveillance requires becoming part of the environment so thoroughly that you're invisible. I attended neighborhood potlucks and book clubs. I baked cookies. I asked about your school days and Noah's skateboarding. I became exactly what you'd expect from a retired librarian next door. But you knew the whole time, Noah said, his voice thick. You knew our whole life was fake and you just watched. Agent Reyes met his eyes. I had a job to do. Your parents stole $45 million from 127 victims. Some of those victims lost their entire retirement savings. 3 people lost their homes. 1 man committed suicide when he realized he'd lost everything. Your parents did that, then ran away and built a new life on stolen money while their victims suffered. The words landed like punches. I'd never thought about where our comfortable suburban life came from. Never questioned how 2 parents working from home on vague consulting jobs could afford a nice house and new cars and everything we needed. Never wondered why we paid cash for everything. Now I knew. We'd been living on money stolen from people whose lives had been destroyed. We didn't know, I said, but it sounded weak even to me. Should we have known? Should we have seen the signs? Agent Reyes's expression softened slightly. You were children when your parents went on the run, 9 and 6 years old. They raised you in this fabricated reality. You didn't have the context or experience to question it. That's not your fault. But it felt like it should be our fault somehow, like we should have sensed something was wrong, like we should have demanded better answers when things didn't add up. At 4:03 a.m., a social worker arrived. Her name was Patricia Morgan, and she had the weary competence of someone who'd done this too many times. She sat down with Noah and me in Agent Reyes's living room and explained what would happen next in calm, clinical terms that made it all seem manageable even though nothing felt manageable. You'll be placed in emergency foster care tonight, technically this morning, while we locate family members who might be willing to provide placement. If no family is suitable or available, you'll remain in state custody until you're 18, Alexis. Noah would remain until he ages out or until permanent placement can be arranged. Patricia pulled out forms and started documenting everything. Our names, ages, schools, medical information we knew. Do you have any health conditions we should be aware of? Medications? Allergies? We answered her questions mechanically, like robots programmed to cooperate. The absurdity of discussing my pollen allergy while my parents were being arrested for fraud made me want to laugh or scream or both. What about school? I asked. I'm supposed to graduate this year. I have college applications pending. Patricia made notes. We'll work with your school district to ensure continuity of education. Your college applications can proceed, though you'll need to update some information about your family circumstances. The state may be able to assist with application fees given the situation. The matter-of-fact way she discussed dismantling my entire life was almost impressive, like she was reading from a manual titled, What to Do When Your Parents Are Arrested as Federal Fugitives, a guide for traumatized teenagers. What about our stuff? Noah asked. My computer, my games, my clothes? Patricia nodded. Law enforcement will inventory everything in the house as part of the investigation. Personal items that aren't evidence will be released to you through the foster system. It may take a few weeks. At 4:38 a.m., Patricia drove us to a group home on the north side of Minneapolis. It was a large, older house converted into temporary housing for kids in crisis. We were shown to separate rooms. Boys and girls were housed in different wings, and told to try to get some sleep. The room I was assigned had 2 twin beds, one already occupied by a sleeping girl who didn't wake up when I entered. The other bed had clean sheets folded on top. I sat on the edge of the mattress and stared at my backpack containing everything I currently owned. My phone buzzed. 3 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. 2 text messages. The first was from a number with a Las Vegas area code. This is your Uncle Thomas Geller. Patricia Morgan from Minnesota Social Services contacted me about you and your brother. I'm so sorry about everything. I'd like to talk when you're ready. We're family. The second was from a Florida number. Alexis, this is your grandmother Barbara Wallace, your mother's mother. I just learned you exist. I have so many questions and so much love to give. Please call when you can. I stared at those messages for 10 minutes. Family members I'd never known existed, reaching out across the wreckage of my parents' lives. People who'd been denied grandchildren and nieces and nephews because my parents had chosen crime and flight over connection. I didn't call them back that night. Didn't know what to say. Instead, I lay down on the unfamiliar bed and watched the ceiling until gray morning light started seeping through the window. The story broke in the news by 9 a.m. FBI arrests fugitive couple after 3-year investigation, ran in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. The article included photos of my parents in handcuffs and a detailed explanation of the Ponzi scheme they'd run in Nevada 8 years ago. They'd convinced investors they were running a high-yield real estate fund, had shown impressive returns for 2 years by paying early investors with money from new investors. Classic pyramid scheme that collapsed when they couldn't recruit fast enough to maintain the illusion. They'd disappeared 3 days before a federal grand jury was set to indict them. The article mentioned 2 minor children, but didn't name Noah and me. At least we had that small mercy. Patricia came to the group home at 10 a.m. with updates. I've spoken with several of your family members. Your Uncle Thomas in Las Vegas is willing to take both of you. Your maternal grandparents in Florida are also interested, but they're elderly and concerned about their ability to handle teenagers. Your paternal aunt in Nevada is a possibility, but she has 4 children of her own and limited space. She showed me photos the family members had sent. Uncle Thomas looked like my father, but friendlier somehow, less tense. My grandmother Barbara had my mother's eyes and was crying in her photo, holding a sign that said, "We love you, Alexis and Noah." The visible proof that family existed, that people cared about us despite never knowing we existed until yesterday, made my chest tight. "What happens with Mom and Dad?" I asked. "Legally, I mean." Patricia pulled out more paperwork, her patient social worker voice never wavering. "They're being held without bail as flight risks, obviously, given their history. They'll face federal prosecution for wire fraud, money laundering, identity theft, and fugitive flight. If convicted, they're looking at significant prison time, 10 to 20 years likely." The numbers felt abstract. My parents would be in prison until I was in my 30s, until Noah was in his 30s. Our childhood was over and their adulthood would be spent in federal custody. "Can we see them?" Noah had been brought to the same meeting room, looking smaller and more lost than I'd ever seen him. Patricia hesitated. "That's complicated. As minors in state custody, you have rights, but contact with incarcerated parents requires supervision and court approval. It can also be psychologically difficult. Many children find it traumatizing to see parents in jail. We'd want you to speak with a therapist first." "But we can if we want to," I pressed. "Eventually?" She nodded. "Yes, after the initial processing and once the court determines it's in your best interest, probably within a month." That afternoon, Agent Reyes came to the group home. She looked different in professional clothes instead of her retired librarian disguise. Younger, harder, more like what I'd imagine an FBI agent to be. "I wanted to check on you both," she said. "Make sure you're managing." Noah refused to look at her, still angry that she'd spied on us for years. I understood his feeling, but I also understood she'd probably saved us from being present during a traumatic raid. "Why did you really warn us?" I asked. "You said you weren't supposed to. You broke protocol to get us out before the arrest. Why?" Agent Reyes sat down across from us, her expression careful. "Because I spent 3 years watching you and Noah, watched you do homework at the kitchen table, watched Noah practice skateboarding in the driveway, watched your parents lie to you every single day about who they were, and I realized that you were victims too, even if you didn't know it. When the operation went active last night, I made a judgment call that I could live with myself more easily if you weren't traumatized by seeing your parents arrested at gunpoint." She pulled out a folder. "I also brought you something. These are photos from your parents' original lives before they became James and Victoria Cross. I thought you might want to see who they really were." The photos showed my parents 8 years younger. My father in business suits at investor meetings, shaking hands and smiling. My mother at charity galas, dressed elegantly, playing the role of successful businessman's wife. Photos of them with family at holidays, with friends at parties. Normal people living normal lives before they decided fraud was easier than honest work. "These people in the photos, your parents' families, their old friends, they're victims too," Agent Reyes said. "Your grandparents reported your mother missing when she disappeared. They filed police reports, hired private investigators, thought something terrible had happened. Finding out she'd been alive all along, living under a false name with grandchildren they never knew existed, has been devastating for them." The layers of damage kept multiplying. My parents hadn't just stolen money. They'd stolen years of family relationships. They'd stolen the chance for Noah and me to know our grandparents, our aunts and uncles, our cousins. They'd stolen everyone's truth and replaced it with lies. "I hate them," Noah said suddenly, his voice breaking. "I hate them for doing this to us." I wanted to argue with him, wanted to defend our parents, wanted to say they'd loved us despite everything. But looking at those photos of the people they'd been before we knew them, I realized I didn't actually know who they were at all. The parents who'd raised me were characters in a long con. Their love might have been real, but everything else had been performance. Over the next 2 weeks, Noah and I lived in the group home while social services worked through placement options. We attended emergency therapy sessions with Dr. Leslie Kim, a psychologist who specialized in children of incarcerated parents. She asked us about our feelings using words like betrayal trauma and complicated grief and identity disruption. She helped us understand that we could love our parents and be angry at them simultaneously, that grief and rage could coexist. We started at new schools, temporary placements while permanent custody was determined. I enrolled at a different high school for my final semester. Noah was placed in an alternative school program with more support. Both of us used our real legal names, Alexis and Noah Geller. Adjusting to that took weeks. I'd been Alexis Cross my entire remembered life. Being Alexis Geller felt like wearing someone else's clothes. Uncle Thomas flew in from Las Vegas during week 3. He was in his mid-40s, worked as a contractor, had a wife named Susan and 2 younger kids. He met us at the group home with Patricia present to supervise. "I've been looking for you for 8 years, were his first words. "When Raymond disappeared with Victoria and you kids, we thought you'd been kidnapped or killed. We filed missing persons reports. We cooperated with FBI investigations. We never stopped hoping we'd find you alive." He pulled out his phone and showed us photos. Photos of me and Noah as babies and toddlers, from before our parents went on the run. Photos we'd never seen because they'd been deleted from our fabricated history. You were 2, and I was changing your diaper once when you peed directly in my face, Uncle Thomas told me, showing me a picture of him holding a giggling baby. Noah, you were obsessed with dinosaurs, had a toy T-Rex you carried everywhere, slept with it every night. These stories felt simultaneously mine and not mine. I couldn't remember being that baby or that toddler, but the photographic evidence proved I had been. Why did they do it? I asked. The Ponzi scheme, the running, all of it. Were they always like this? Uncle Thomas's expression darkened. Raymond was always ambitious, always looking for shortcuts to success. Growing up, he'd cut corners, cheat on tests, find ways to get ahead without doing the work. But I never thought he'd become a criminal. Never thought he'd steal from people and run away with his family. When we found out what he'd done, it destroyed our parents. They died still not knowing where you kids were. The revelation that we'd had grandparents who died searching for us was almost too much. More stolen relationships, more damage radiating outward from our parents' decisions. We want you to come live with us, Uncle Thomas said. Both of you. We have room, we have resources, and you're family. You belong with family. I looked at Patricia. Is that allowed? Can we just go live with him? She nodded. He's a blood relative who's passed all background checks. He has stable housing and income. The court would likely approve his custody petition. But it's your choice, Alexis. You're 17, almost 18. The court will consider your wishes. Noah's too, given his age. Noah looked at me, waiting for my decision. At 14, he was used to following my lead. I thought about staying in Minneapolis, where everything had fallen apart, or moving to Las Vegas to live with an uncle we'd just met, starting over in a place where nobody knew our story. Can we visit our parents before we decide? I asked. I need to talk to them first. Patricia arranged it. 3 weeks and 4 days after the arrest, Noah and I were driven to the federal detention center where our parents were being held. We met with them separately, in small rooms with guards watching, phones through glass like something from a movie. My mother went first. She looked smaller than I remembered, wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hair pulled back without the careful styling she'd always maintained. She cried when she saw me, pressed her hand against the glass. Alexis, baby, I'm so sorry. We never meant for you to find out like this. How did you mean for us to find out? I asked through the phone. When exactly were you planning to tell us our entire lives were lies? She flinched at my tone. We were protecting you. Everything we did was to protect you and Noah. Protect us from what? From knowing our grandparents? From having family? From being honest people? My voice was rising. Anger I'd been suppressing for weeks finally breaking through. You stole $45 million from people, Mom. People who lost everything. People who killed themselves because of what you did. And you spent 8 years running from consequences while lying to your own children every single day. That wasn't protection. That was selfishness. She was crying harder now. We made mistakes. We know that. But we loved you. We gave you a good life. That has to count for something. It doesn't count for anything if it was built on stolen money, I said. I'm going to live with Uncle Thomas in Las Vegas. Noah and I both are. We're going to get to know the family you kept from us. We're going to build real lives with real identities. And you're going to prison. That's what you chose when you committed crimes and ran. My mother's face crumbled. You hate us. You hate me. I wanted to say yes. Wanted to tell her I hated her for destroying our lives. But looking at her through that glass, I felt something more complicated than hate. Disappointment, grief, exhaustion. I don't know what I feel, I said honestly. Except that I can't trust anything you ever told me. And I can't forgive what you did to all those people and to us. Maybe someday I'll be able to talk to you again, but not now. My father was worse. He didn't cry, didn't apologize, just insisted they'd had no choice, that the business had gone bad and they'd panicked, that they'd been planning to pay everyone back eventually. All the classic fraud excuses, all the delusions of people who'd convinced themselves they weren't really criminals. You have to understand, he said through the phone. We did this for you, to give you a better life than we could have provided otherwise. You did this for yourselves, I corrected. You wanted money and prestige and you didn't care how you got it. Noah and I were just props in your fraud, and now we're the ones paying for your choices. He got angry then. You think you're better than us? You lived in that house, spent that money, benefited from everything we built. You're complicit whether you want to admit it or not. The accusation hit exactly where he'd aimed it. The guilt I'd been carrying about our comfortable life, about not seeing the signs, about being unknowingly supported by stolen funds. I was a child, I said quietly. I didn't choose any of this, but I'm choosing now. I'm choosing to live an honest life. I'm choosing family who didn't lie to me for 8 years. I'm choosing to be nothing like you. His face went red with rage, but I hung up the phone before he could respond. Noah's meetings with them went similarly. Tears from Mom, anger from Dad, both of us leaving feeling emptied and certain of our decision. Within a week, Patricia had processed the paperwork. Uncle Thomas was granted temporary custody pending finalization. By the end of January, 2 months after that 3 a.m. knock on our door, Noah and I moved to Las Vegas. Uncle Thomas's house was in a suburb full of kids and dogs and normalcy. His wife Susan was kind and patient, Their kids Lily and Mason were energetic and curious about their new older cousins. They welcomed us without judgment, without pity, just with simple acceptance that we were family, and family belonged together. We enrolled in new schools. I finished my senior year at a Las Vegas high school, resubmitted college applications explaining my unusual family circumstances in essays that probably read like fiction but were painfully true. Noah started fresh at a middle school where nobody knew his history. We saw therapists regularly, attended support groups for children of incarcerated parents, slowly, painfully, built new identities that weren't based on lies. My grandparents, Barbara and Frank Wallace, flew out to visit 6 weeks after we moved. My grandmother cried for 3 hours straight, holding us, apologizing for not knowing we existed, showing us photo albums of our mother's childhood. She was such a bright girl, Barbara said, looking at pictures of my mother at my age. So smart and ambitious. We never understood when she changed, when she became someone who could hurt people. We blamed ourselves for years. The tendency to blame ourselves for others' crimes was apparently hereditary. I recognized my own guilt reflected in my grandmother's face. It's not your fault, I told her. Just like it's not mine or Noah's. Mom and Dad made their own choices. We're just the collateral damage. The trial happened in April. Noah and I didn't attend. Our therapist advised against it, said watching our parents be publicly condemned would be re-traumatizing. But we read the news coverage, saw the victim impact statements from people whose lives had been destroyed, saw our parents plead guilty to avoid trial, accept plea deals that meant 18 years for Dad, 15 years for Mom, saw them taken away to federal prison where they'd spend what remained of their prime years. Agent Reyes testified about the 3-year surveillance operation. Her testimony revealed details I hadn't known, how she'd tracked our parents' online activity, intercepted their communications with other fugitives, built the case brick by brick until it was unbeatable. The judge commended her dedication and thorough work. She received a commendation from the FBI. In the end, my parents forfeited all assets. The house, the cars, everything was liquidated to pay restitution to victims. Noah and I received nothing from their estate. Technically, we were never legally entitled to stolen money anyway. But Uncle Thomas set up funds for our education from his own savings, said family took care of family. I graduated high school in June. Gave a speech at graduation about resilience and reinvention that carefully avoided mentioning why I'd needed to reinvent myself. Got accepted to 3 colleges and chose the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, where I could stay close to Noah and our uncle's family while starting the next chapter. 2 years later, Noah was thriving in high school. I was studying criminal justice, planning to become a prosecutor. Wanted to spend my life making sure people like my parents faced consequences for their actions. We visited our mother twice a year in federal prison, short, supervised visits where she apologized repeatedly, and we tried to find forgiveness we weren't sure we could offer. Our father we didn't visit. He'd made it clear he felt we'd betrayed him by testifying against him during sentencing, by choosing Uncle Thomas over standing by him. The relationship was broken beyond repair. Uncle Thomas adopted us legally when I turned 18 and Noah was 16. We became Alexis and Noah Geller officially and permanently, shedding the last remnants of the cross identity that had never really been ours. Agent Reyes sent Christmas cards every year, brief notes saying she hoped we were doing well, that she thought of us often, that she was glad her 3 a.m. decision to warn us had given us a chance at normal lives. I wrote back thanking her for caring enough about 2 kids to risk her career and protocol. 3 years after that knock on the door, I went back to Minneapolis, visited the house we'd lived in, now owned by a different family, stood outside Mrs. Kowalski's house, Agent Reyes' surveillance post, and remembered the night everything changed. I wondered sometimes what would have happened if she hadn't warned us, if we'd been asleep in our beds when SWAT came through the door, if we'd watched our parents arrested violently, been traumatized by the immediate chaos. Agent Reyes had given us the gift of a few hours' warning, the gift of leaving on our own terms, packing our bags, walking away with dignity instead of being carried out crying. That gift had made all the difference. 4 years later, I graduated college with honors. Noah was headed to college himself, planning to study computer science. We'd built lives that were real, honest, and ours. Uncle Thomas walked me down the aisle when I got married at 25. My grandmother Barbara cried tears of joy in the front row. My mother sent a letter from prison congratulating me, still asking for forgiveness, still promising she'd be better when she was released in another 11 years. I sent a polite card back but didn't visit. Some wounds heal, some just scar over. Learning to live with the scars was the best I could do. 5 years after the arrest, Noah and I were having dinner when he asked the question I'd been avoiding. Do you forgive them, Mom and Dad? I thought about it, about the parents who'd raised me with love while lying about everything, about the criminals who'd stolen millions and ran, about the people who'd cut us off from family to preserve their own freedom, about the choices they'd made and the consequences we'd all lived with. I forgive them for being human, I said finally, for making mistakes, for being weak, for panicking when things went bad, but I don't forgive them for the years of lies, for stealing our grandparents and uncle and extended family, for building our lives on other people's pain. I don't think I'll ever forgive that. Noah nodded. Yeah, that's about where I am too. We raised our glasses and toasted to truth, to family that chose us, to the lives we'd rebuilt from wreckage. 10 years after that 3 a.m. knock, I was a federal prosecutor. Worked cases involving fraud, identity theft, fugitives, saw families destroyed by crime, and tried to minimize the collateral damage, especially when children were involved. I thought about my parents every time I prosecuted someone for similar crimes. Wondered if anyone had looked at them and seen people or just criminals. Wondered if compassion and justice could coexist in a system designed for punishment. Agent Gloria Reyes retired from the FBI and started consulting on witness protection and fugitive psychology. We stayed in touch, met for coffee once a year. She never apologized for the surveillance, never expressed regret for doing her job, but she always asked about Noah and always seemed genuinely relieved that we'd survived our parents' choices intact. You know, she said during one of our meetings, I've conducted dozens of surveillance operations, watched hundreds of criminals, but I've never broken protocol before or since that night I warned you and Noah. It was the right choice and the wrong choice simultaneously. Cost me a formal reprimand but gave you a chance. I'd do it again. I thanked her for that, for seeing us as people instead of just collateral damage in a federal case, for caring enough to break rules designed to catch criminals, for being the adult who put our well-being first when our own parents had put their freedom ahead of our truth. My mother was released from federal prison when I was 32 and Noah was 29. She moved to a halfway house in Nevada, started the process of rebuilding a life after 15 years of incarceration. She called and asked to meet. Noah said no. I said maybe. We'll see. Because the truth was, I'd spent 15 years learning to live without the parents who raised me, learning to define myself not as the daughter of criminals, but as a person who'd survived their crimes. I'd built something real from the wreckage they'd left behind. Whether I could fit my mother back into that life remained to be seen. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never lie to my children, would never build their lives on stolen foundations, would never make them pay for my choices. The knock at 3 a.m. had destroyed one life but given us the chance to build better ones. In the end, that was the only inheritance that mattered. Truth, family that chose us, lives we'd earned honestly. Agent Reyes had given us those hours to pack, to prepare, to leave with dignity. Those hours had been the difference between trauma and survival. And I carried that gift with me every day, reminded that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion, a warning, a few extra minutes, someone caring enough to break protocol, could change everything. My neighbor knocked at 3 a.m. and told us our family wasn't who they said they were, so we packed our bags and left. And in leaving, we found out who we really were. That turned out to be enough. If you made it this far, hit like, you've earned it.